For more, we're joined in Washington, D.C. by Lori Wallach, director of the Rethink Trade program at American Economic Liberties Project, board member of Citizens Trade Campaign, the U.S. National Trade Justice Coalition of unions and environmental, consumer, faith, family, farm, and other groups. Lori, welcome back to Democracy Now! Respond to what's supposedly going to be enacted tomorrow. Now, let's be clear. That's Tuesday. Trudeau said he's tried to reach out to the president. He won't return his calls. The president says he's going to speak to both presidents, Mexico and Canadian prime minister and presidents today. What's going on here?
So tariffs can be a very effective tool to achieve lots of goals. If you're for enforceable labor standards and trade agreements to raise wages, you're for tariffs. If you are for border carbon adjustment to promote low-carbon production, you're for tariffs. Tariffs are part of the formula of the tools you use to try and reestablish our ability to make things here that we need and create good jobs. The two-thirds of Americans who don't have a college degree, so making solar panels, medicine, EVs. But slapping on tariffs on Mexico and Canada, ostensibly about migration and drug trafficking, is not just ineffective. I mean, it's like trying to do surgery with a saxophone instead of a scalpel, but also is going to be damaging. It's going to cause enormous disruption, but without any of the outcomes and goals that one might actually want to use a tariff to achieve to help working people or build our resilience.
What is Trump trying to accomplish here? Some have said, I mean, on one hand, he's been threatening China with tariffs, but he's doing, he said, 10% on China. And with his allies, Mexico and Canada, 25%. Some suggest that maybe the fact that Elon Musk has a factory in Shanghai brought down the tariffs on China. Your thoughts?
The reason probably for the 10% is that there are already around 20% tariffs on two-thirds of all of our trade with China, still in place from 2018 during the first Trump term. And then President Biden raised tariffs on EVs, on solar and other things to 100% with respect to China. So this is 10% on top of the existing 20%. So actually now everything will have at least 10%, but a lot of stuff will have 30% or 100%. Coming from China. But, you know, here is the question. Tariffs, legitimate tool, but what is the purpose here? If you're trying to fix the redone NAFTA, the so-called U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, which was Trump's redo of NAFTA, then there's a built-in 6-year renegotiation that basically starts now. If you can't fix it, you get rid of the whole thing. But there's a process to do that. You know, USMCA was supposed to bring down after trade deficit and job offshoring. Instead, since 2020, the trade deficit's doubled and offshoring's continued. So that Trump trade negotiation clearly needs some fixing, but there's a way to do that. It's not the tariffs. Or if you're trying to generally use tariffs to try and rebalance our chronic trade imbalance, which is promoted in deindustrialization and income inequality, well, then you use a variety of tools together, including to make sure that the companies that have had record profits from this old system pay for the transition by making it easier to organize unions and doing anti-price gouging policies so companies don't use their monopoly power to raise prices. Even if you're trying to stop the flow of fentanyl, bizarrely, if you actually read the executive order, there's a loophole. The president has authority called the de minimis we've talked about before. The president has existing authority to close, and they still allow informal entries of these 4 million packages a day in which the fentanyl is buried, which he could have fixed if he really was focusing on drugs. So it is a very mysterious and potentially damaging state of affairs. And
in the case of fentanyl, I think in 2024, there were like 43 pounds of fentanyl that was seized at the American-Canadian border. I think more went the other way. I also want to turn to the UAW president, Shawn Fain, on tariffs. He wrote on social media, the UAW supports aggressive tariff action to protect American manufacturing jobs as a good first step to undoing decades of anti-worker trade policy. We do not support using factory workers as pawns in a fight over immigration or drug policy, he said. Lori Wallach, your response.
So I think UAW President Shawn Fain had it exactly right. And actually, in my long tweet thread about these tariffs, I cited him because, again, as I started out, tariffs are a really powerful tool. And when used particularly in combination with things like investment policies to try and actually spur domestic production capacity, new factories, creating demand for American-made, high-wage, high-environmental standards goods, by putting together a package of policies and keeping them in place, not just random tariff here, could go away tomorrow, you actually incentivize the kind of investment you could rebalance. We certainly don't want to hold on to the old devastating neoliberal trade agenda. But the random tariffs on Mexico and Canada, compared to a strategic use of tariffs with a mix of other tools, the random tariffs aren't going to get you the outcome you want, even on the fentanyl. Again, closing the de minimis loophole, a thing a president has authority to do, stopping the ability of 4 million packages, mainly e-commerce packages, mainly from China, to come in uninspected without the normal customs information. So they closed half of this in this executive order. They said that stuff can't slip in without paying tariffs anymore. Okay. But then they allow the stuff to come in uninspected. And so ostensibly, if you're trying to stop fentanyl, probably more important than the pay the tariff is the don't sneak in the stuff uninspected. But they didn't do that. This is something they could actually fix tomorrow if they wanted to. The bigger use of trade policies to try and fix our mess, what they did or may not impose tonight at midnight, doesn't fit into agenda of making things better for working people or the planet, not here, not anywhere.
And let's talk about immigrants. AP cites a new study by Warwick McKibben and Marcus Noland of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. The study found, quote, for Mexico, a 25% tariff would be catastrophic. Moreover, the economic decline caused by the tariff could increase the incentive for Mexican immigrants cross the border into the U.S., directly contradicting another Trump administration priority. Lori Wallach.
Well, I mean, this is, again, the perverse irony. There was a Trump trade plan issued on January 20th that laid out in an orderly fashion a rational sense of how to do a new trade agenda. This is unrelated to that because, for instance, one of the things that spurred the original wave of migration from Mexico to the United States was NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which displaced millions of campesino peasant families off of their rural livelihoods by dumping subsidized U.S. corn into Mexico and suddenly destroying the livelihoods of millions of people who first went to the border, to the low-wage maquiladora plants, couldn't make a living there, couldn't feed your family on $5 a day, and then used migration to try and come to make a living for themselves and their families, in a way forced by this economic displacement of the neoliberal trade agreements. And we saw that repeated with Central America Free Trade Agreement and increased migration from Central America. So if we want to get to the root causes of the neoliberal economic policies imposed these so-called trade agreements and junk them, yes, that has to happen. Is what 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, unrelated to any of those economic goals, going to help the situation versus make it worse? No. Are tariffs part of the solution? Yes. Is this use of tariffs going to help? No, it could make things much worse.
Lori Wallach, I want to thank you for being with us, Director of the Rethink Trade Program at the American Economic Liberties Project and a board member of the Citizens Trade Campaign. Next up, the